Chapter 1. The Invisible Force That Moves the World. There is a force in this world, quiet, unseen, often misunderstood, that moves armies without orders, opens doors without credentials, wins hearts without rehearsals, and leaves rooms echoing with silence long after its presence is gone. It is not charm. It is not beauty. It is not eloquence. It is something older, something deeper, something raw. It is charisma. Not the kind you fake on stages or dress in designer suits. Not the cheap counterfeit that hides behind fake smiles and empty compliments. I'm talking about the real thing. The gravitational pull of a human being so aligned with themselves that people can't look away. The presence that demands nothing, yet receives everything. The voice that speaks without begging, but penetrates like truth. The body that doesn't perform confidence, but embodies it so deeply that it makes others feel like they've stepped into certainty itself. And here's the truth they don't tell you. Charisma is not a gift. It is not reserved for the chosen few. It is not in your genetics, your background, your looks, or your luck. It is built. It is engineered. It is forged in the fire of awareness, and anyone, yes, anyone, can unlock it. But to do so, you must be willing to abandon everything artificial. You must drop the masks, strip down the performance, and go to war with the part of you that still thinks you need permission to matter. You see, charisma is not about impressing others. It's about becoming undeniably yourself. It's about walking into a room and shifting the temperature, not because you're loud, but because you're clear. It's the clarity that cuts through small talk like a blade. The alignment between your words, your eyes, your energy, and your presence that tells people, I know who I am, and I don't need you to confirm it. That's what makes it magnetic. That's what makes it unforgettable. History doesn't remember those who begged for attention. It remembers those who didn't need it. Lincoln didn't shout. He held silence. Edison didn't demand belief. He demonstrated inevitability. Carnegie didn't force respect. He radiated conviction. They weren't liked because they tried to be. They were respected because they stood for something, and that something lived in every breath, every glance, every movement. You want charisma? Then start here. Stop trying to be impressive. Start being aligned. Because people can feel when you're performing. They can feel when you're editing yourself to fit in. They can feel when your confidence is a costume. But they can also feel when it's real, when it's lived, earned, trained, tested, scarred. Charisma is not about being perfect. It's about being whole. And being whole begins with the most important shift of all, the one inside your mind. Chapter 2. Mindset, the terrain where presence is forged. Before anyone listens to you, before they respond to your body language, before they remember your name, they are scanning something far more subtle, far more primal, and far more decisive. They are reading the frequency of your mindset, the invisible field that surrounds you and either draws people in like a gravitational force or pushes them away like static. And the truth that most never accept is that what people call charisma is not built in conversation, not in posture, not in voice tone. Those are all symptoms. What it all comes down to, at the core, is how your mind has been shaped to interpret the world, how it holds itself under pressure, how it processes attention, judgment, approval, silence, uncertainty, and challenge, because your external presence is nothing but the broadcast of your internal programming. If your mindset is wired for doubt, you will hesitate where decisiveness is needed, your speech will shake, your eye contact will stutter, your energy will collapse under scrutiny, not because you lack charisma, but because you never trained your inner certainty to stay alive when others question it. And if your mind is trained to seek validation, your words will always bend toward pleasing, your energy will chase approval, and even your compliments will sound like a transaction rather than a truth, because people can feel when your mindset is built on lack, even if your appearance is polished. Charisma, real charisma, begins in the invisible work, the unseen hours where you decide what kind of presence you will carry into a room before you ever speak a word. It begins in how you hold yourself in silence, how you narrate failure to yourself, how you sit with rejection and still breathe through it, how you walk through a crowd not trying to impress, but simply understanding your place in it, not above, not below, but deeply rooted within your own sense of worth. The most magnetic people in the world are not trying to be magnetic. They are simply so internally aligned, so fundamentally rooted, that people instinctively adjust themselves around them. And this mindset is not theoretical, it is trained. You are training it right now, whether you realize it or not. Every time you silence yourself out of fear, you are reinforcing a mindset of invisibility. Every time you speak just to fill the void, you are reinforcing a mindset of insecurity. Every time you scroll through someone else's life, comparing it to your own, you are reinforcing a mindset of insufficiency. And that's the poison that leaks through your tone, through your gestures, through your pacing. Because no matter how hard you try to mask it, the body is honest. It can only reflect what's inside. The mind of the charismatic is not louder than others, it is clearer. It is a mind that has identified its values and burns away distraction. It is a mind that does not flinch under criticism because it was never seeking applause in the first place. It is a mind that can enter any room and read its energy without absorbing its chaos. It is a mind that understands when to speak and when to wait, not because of fear, but because of timing, because charisma is not about filling silence. It's about knowing what that silence is doing to everyone else and knowing when to own it. This mindset is not inherited. It is built by repeated confrontation with the parts of yourself that still want to be liked more than they want to be authentic, that still want to be seen more than they want to stand for something, and you will not build this mindset by reading surface-level advice, by imitating gestures, by manipulating conversation tactics. You will build it by choosing clarity over comfort, by choosing truth over popularity, by choosing presence over performance, every single time. Because the truth is, you do not need to convince people of your value. You need to believe it first. You need to walk into a room as if your existence is not an audition. You need to stop narrating every interaction as a test and start treating it as a stage you were already invited to walk across. That shift, when made fully, changes everything. Your gestures slow down. Your breath deepens. Your eyes stop darting. Your shoulders stop apologizing. Your voice stops negotiating its right to be heard. And suddenly, people feel like they're in the presence of someone they want to listen to, not because you demanded it, but because you no longer needed it. And once that becomes your default mindset, charisma stops being something you chase and starts being something you carry. Not as an act, not as a strategy, but as a truth. You don't smile to be liked, you smile because you're present. You don't hold eye contact to dominate, you hold it because you're not hiding. You don't raise your voice to seem confident, you speak clearly because you trust what you're saying. And that trust? It spreads. Because people don't follow the loudest energy in the room, they follow the most stable one. And the most stable energy always comes from someone who has done the work within their own mind first. So you want to build charisma? Start with the terrain where it's forged. Start with the beliefs you carry into every room. Start with the inner conversation behind your outer confidence. Because the moment your mind becomes clear, grounded, untangled from the need to perform, you become unforgettable. Not because you tried to be, but because presence like that is rare, and we are biologically drawn to rarity. We remember what feels real. That's where it all begins. Not with others. With you. Not with what you say. With what you believe when you say it. Not with what you show. With what you embody. And if you can master your mind, you won't have to chase connection. It will find you. Chapter 3. Belief. The internal permission that the world reads before you speak. Every room you enter is reading you before you even open your mouth, not because people are trained psychologists or experts in behavioral science, but because humans, by their very nature, are neurologically wired to scan for emotional safety, strength, clarity, authenticity, and long before they even process your words or your appearance, they are responding to something more primal, more visceral, more deeply rooted. Your belief, the felt sense of how much you actually believe what you say, how much you believe in your own worth, in your right to take up space, in the legitimacy of your presence, and in the value of your contribution. Belief is not declared, it is broadcasted through everything, through your body, your eyes, your silence, your timing, your posture, and every unconscious signal you emit without trying. Charisma without belief is hollow. It's a mask. It's a trick that stops working the moment someone looks too closely. But charisma anchored in belief, That's the kind of presence that commands rooms without demanding attention. That's the kind of energy that makes people feel safer simply by being near it, because it doesn't come from trying, it comes from knowing. And people feel that difference. They always do. Because belief is not something you say, it's something people sense before you finish your first sentence. Look at history. Look at the titans of industry, the architects of revolutions, the creators of movements that changed the shape of civilization. Thomas Edison didn't wait for the world to agree before he acted. He believed so deeply in his vision that failure didn't slow him down, because his belief was not contingent on external evidence. Henry Ford didn't ask if the world was ready, he decided it would be. His belief in what was possible was so unshakable that it made others feel stupid for doubting him. Abraham Lincoln walked into the chaos of a divided country not with all the answers, but with the unbreakable belief that it was worth healing, and that belief, more than his rhetoric, more than his strategy, more than his image, made people trust him. Because people don't follow intelligence. They follow conviction. So the question isn't whether you're charismatic enough. The question is, what do you believe about yourself when no one's looking? What do you believe about your worth, about your ability to influence, about your capacity to be heard, to be respected, to be remembered? Because that internal belief doesn't stay hidden. It leaks through every micro-movement of your face, every pause in your voice, every shift in your tone, every unconscious message your body sends when your words are saying one thing and your nervous system is telling a different story. When you believe deeply, you don't need to over-explain. You don't need to convince. You don't need to sell yourself. Your very presence becomes the message. And people begin responding to you not because you're perfect, not because you checked all the boxes, but because you're carrying something they can't quite define, something that makes them feel like they're standing in the presence of something real, something they can trust. And in a world of masks and performance, realness is rare enough to be magnetic. And this belief is not built overnight. It's not something you chant in the mirror once and expect to transform your reality. It is earned, just like muscle, just like discipline, just like trust. It is forged in moments when no one claps. In moments when your voice shakes but you speak anyway. In the seconds when doubt creeps in and you choose to walk forward instead of shrinking back. It is built slowly, quietly, consistently, through repetition, through exposure, through the courage to show up again, even after you were ignored, overlooked, misunderstood, rejected. Because belief doesn't come from winning. It comes from surviving the times you didn't, and staying in the game anyway. That's what creates magnetic people. Not the illusion of confidence, but the repetition of resilience, until it becomes your baseline, until you no longer need to pretend to believe in yourself, because now the belief has rooted so deeply in your nervous system that your presence speaks it louder than your words ever could. That's when eye contact feels like gravity. That's when silence becomes louder than shouting. That's when a subtle shift in your tone carries more weight than a 10-minute pitch, because belief amplifies everything. And when people feel that signal, they listen. They lean in. They remember. So if you want charisma that lasts, stop memorizing techniques and start building truth. Build the kind of belief that doesn't require performance. Build the kind of belief that can't be shaken by one bad meeting or one skeptical glance. Build the kind of belief that's so woven into who you are that even in failure, your presence still feels like a threat to the mediocre. Because when belief lives in your body, you walk differently. You speak differently. You show up in rooms as if your voice belongs, not because someone said it did, but because you decided it does. And once you've made that decision, everything else begins to align. People stop questioning you. Not because you forced them to agree, but because your belief made their doubt irrelevant. That's the real blueprint. That's the real signal. And that's what the world can't ignore. Chapter 4. Clarity, the unshakable frame that defines you before you speak. There is a kind of power that does not raise its voice, does not race to be first, does not rely on theatrics or exaggerated gestures. It is the kind of power that walks into a room and instantly calibrates the energy without saying a word, not because it's loud, but because it's clear, because the person carrying it has already decided who they are, what they stand for, and what they do not need from anyone in the room. And that internal clarity radiates out like a silent command that says, I am not here to perform, I am here to be, And in that stillness, in that refusal to waver, real charisma begins to emerge. Clarity is what makes your presence cut through the noise. In a world where everyone is scanning, posturing, pretending, adjusting, performing, clarity is rare, and people feel it instantly, even if they can't explain it. They feel it in the way you speak when you're not grasping for approval, in the way you hold eye contact when there's no need to prove anything, in the way your energy remains steady even when tension rises, because the person with clarity is already home, already rooted in something deeper than validation, already certain about who they are, and that certainty doesn't need to be aggressive to be unforgettable. Most people never reach this level not because they lack talent, but because they are addicted to confusion. They stay in analysis, in overthinking, in trying to read the room before they've read themselves, and in doing so, they become shapeshifters, constantly adjusting to what they think people want, instead of grounding themselves in what they actually believe. And when your energy is shaped by reaction instead of conviction, your charisma becomes diluted, your presence becomes forgettable. And no matter how many books you've read or techniques you've memorized, people will walk away remembering only your performance, not your essence. Clarity is not about having all the answers. It's about removing the noise. It's the stripping away of everything that's been added to you. Every false label, every performative mask, every belief you inherited but never examined, every behavior rooted in fear instead of vision. Clarity is not something you learn. It's something you uncover, something you reclaim by choosing, day by day, to stop being everyone else's version of enough and start being your own definition of real. That's when people start paying attention. Not when you try harder, but when you stop hiding behind complexity. And this isn't theory, it's visible, it's tactile, it's felt. You know the moment someone is speaking from clarity because there is no excess. There's no overcompensation. Their words are precise. Their pauses are intentional. Their body language is congruent. They're not trying to win you over, they're simply delivering a truth they already carry, and that's why it lands with weight, that's why it echoes, that's why it imprints itself in memory, because the human nervous system recognizes alignment when it hears it, and clarity is alignment in motion. Look at those who've shifted the culture, not by pleasing crowds, but by anchoring themselves so deeply in who they are that the world had no choice but to adjust around them. Steve Jobs was not known for being likable, he was known for being clear. His clarity about what mattered to him, about what great design was, what simplicity felt like, what experience demanded, was so complete that even when he was wrong, people followed him, not because he spoke louder, but because he spoke with the weight of certainty. Maya Angelou didn't flood the room with noise, she focused it. Her presence, her cadence, her tone, all emerged from a mind that had already decided what mattered. Her words carried gravity because her identity was not floating, it was anchored. This is what clarity gives you, the ability to enter any room and never shrink, never puff up, never adjust yourself into something smaller or louder to fit the container, because your clarity becomes the container and others will feel it. They may not agree with you, they may challenge you, but they will respect you, because people don't respect perfection, they respect precision, they respect self-knowledge. And clarity is the highest form of that knowledge made visible. So the question becomes, what are you still unclear about? What parts of yourself have you left undefined, unclaimed, unexamined? Because where you are vague, others will interpret you through their lens, not yours. And that is how charisma dies in the hands of ambiguity. If you want to be respected, if you want to be remembered, if you want to walk into a conversation and shift the emotional current without needing to dominate it, then you must decide who you are before they decide for you. And no, this clarity will not come from confidence alone. Confidence is the fire. Clarity is the frame. Without clarity, confidence becomes chaos. It becomes noise. It becomes a scattered light that illuminates nothing. But with clarity, every word you speak becomes a chisel, every gesture becomes a line drawn in stone, every silence becomes a statement. And suddenly the people in front of you are no longer distracted, no longer drifting, they are focused, pulled into your orbit by the sheer gravity of your certainty. And when you live like that, when your energy becomes precise, your intent becomes obvious, your values become visible in how you move, not just what you say, you become unforgettable, not because you tried to be, but because clarity is impossible to ignore in a world addicted to confusion. Chapter 5. Vision, the inner compass that organizes your presence. There comes a point in your journey where mindset, belief, and clarity are no longer enough. Because even if you've built confidence, even if you've sharpened your thinking and stripped away the noise, if you don't know where you're going, if you haven't crystallized what you stand for and what you're building towards, your presence will still feel incomplete, like a strong signal that leads nowhere. Because vision is the final layer that transforms charisma from a momentary impression into a lasting legacy, and without vision, your energy can only burn. It cannot build. Vision is what makes presence directional. It turns your energy into a map. It organizes your thoughts, your tone, your posture, your silence, and your timing around a mission, and when someone with vision speaks, even their pauses feel like they're going somewhere, because they are not talking for attention, they are transmitting purpose. And this is the invisible difference between those who impress you for 5 minutes and those who change your direction forever. The former react to the room, the latter reshape it based on where they're already headed. People can feel when you're living according to something bigger than the moment. They sense when your confidence isn't rooted in performance, but in direction. That's what makes leaders charismatic. It's not that they always speak perfectly, it's that their words are woven into a larger story, and the human mind is biologically wired to follow a story. That's why we remember those who move us. It's not the words, it's the feeling that those words belong to something. Look at every figure who's ever commanded attention not through force, but through vision. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't speak from a place of complaint. He spoke from a place of design. He didn't just describe pain. He described what came after it, and in doing so, he made people feel like they were part of something transcendent. Walt Disney didn't just sell animation. He created a world, and when he spoke about that world, his energy carried the certainty of someone who already lived inside it. And that's why people believed him, even when the logistics didn't make sense. Vision transcends the visible. It draws people into what's possible, and once you embody that, people don't just hear you, they follow you. But you can't fake this. You can't pick up someone else's vision and expect it to light you up. You can't imitate confidence built on clarity if you're still walking through life without anchoring your direction. You have to know why you're here, not in a cliché way, not in a motivational speech way, but in a visceral, structured, soul-level clarity that allows every part of you, your energy, your words, your expressions, to orient around a future that exists inside you first. Without that, even your best charisma will fade, because charisma without vision is a flame without oxygen. It flickers bright, then disappears. And this vision, this inner compass, doesn't just guide your message. It affects your movement. When you have vision, you walk with rhythm, not rush. You speak with weight, not volume. You engage with intent, not habit. You make eye contact with a sense of calm, not tension, because you're not in a hurry to prove yourself. You're simply bringing others into something larger than yourself, and the moment people sense that, they stop resisting. They start aligning. Because people don't resist truth, they resist lack of direction. And when your vision is clear, there is no more confusion to resist. Vision also protects your presence. It prevents you from getting derailed by temporary feedback, because you've already defined what matters long-term. It keeps you grounded in the face of disagreement, because you know where you're going and who you're becoming. It gives you the strength to say no without apology, to pause without losing momentum, to lead without needing permission, because vision doesn't beg. It doesn't entertain doubt. It doesn't look for shortcuts. It simply moves forward with ruthless clarity, and that clarity becomes felt in every word you speak. That's why those with vision never come across as desperate. Even in silence, they feel full. Even in rejection, they feel composed. Because they're not here to be accepted, they're here to build. And that energy is what makes people listen, trust, follow, even when they don't fully understand yet what you're creating. Because vision is not just spoken, it is transmitted through consistency, and over time, people begin to feel that you are not changing your shape based on reactions, you are refining your direction based on purpose. So, if your presence still feels fragile, if your confidence still disappears when you're misunderstood, if your energy still fluctuates based on the attention you get, then you don't need better words, you don't need a better strategy, You need a clearer vision, a future version of yourself that is so vivid, so detailed, so alive inside your mind that every interaction becomes part of its execution. Without that, you'll always be at the mercy of the room. But with it, you become the room. That's what makes vision the force multiplier of all other traits. It amplifies confidence. It strengthens posture. It gives gravity to your silence. It gives intention to your speech. It makes your presence feel like a movement, not a moment. And when your vision becomes your compass, people don't just remember you, they start rearranging their reality around what you believe. Chapter 6. Purpose, the inner fire that burns louder than your words. If vision is the direction your energy is moving, then purpose is the heat behind it, the unshakable reason why you keep showing up, why you keep refining, why you keep leaning into resistance even when the easier choice would be to pull back, stay silent, or pretend you don't care. And without that fire, without a reason that transcends your image, your reputation, your temporary emotions, your charisma will eventually fracture under pressure, because people don't follow you because you're clever or smooth or polished. They follow you because they feel something deeper, a kind of burning certainty that says, this person is not here by accident, this person knows what they're building, and this person means it. Purpose is not a line on your resume, not a paragraph on your website, not a phrase you say to sound insightful. It's the force behind your emotional congruence, the reason your words have weight, the reason your presence carries intensity without tension, the reason people pause when you speak and feel moved, not because you're entertaining them, but because you're transmitting something that matters, something that costs you something that's connected to pain you've faced, struggles you've survived, convictions you've bled for, even if no one saw you go through it, and that's what gives you power. Because when people look at you, what they're scanning for, whether consciously or not, is not just intelligence or confidence or charisma, it's alignment, and alignment only happens when what you say is backed by what you stand for, and that only happens when purpose is no longer a theory in your mind but a felt experience in your body, something you carry into every room, every word, every silence, without trying to convince anyone, because when you truly know your purpose, your presence does the talking. You can see it in the ones who have it. Their stillness is different, not hesitant, not guarded, but deliberate, because they're not trying to win you over. They're focused on something bigger than your reaction. Their tone doesn't spike for attention, because they're not desperate to be seen. They're here to speak what must be spoken. Their eyes don't scan for approval. They scan for resonance, for connection, for the one person in the room who's ready to go where they're going and they don't perform for the rest, because their identity isn't on the line. Purpose is what gives your charisma direction with meaning. Without it, you're just posturing. With it, you become unforgettable, not because you shouted louder, but because your very existence began to represent something, and representation is the deepest form of influence. When your presence becomes the embodiment of something bigger than you, an idea, a principle, a future, people feel that, and they don't always know how to explain it, but they'll say things like, there's just something about you. I trust you and I don't know why. You feel different from everyone else. And what they're describing is purpose made visible. This is why the greatest communicators in history didn't just speak well. They spoke from a place that couldn't be faked. When Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his message, it wasn't rehearsed to impress. It was born from conviction forged in pain. When Maya Angelou wrote or recited her words, it wasn't to entertain. It was to liberate, to bear witness, to invite others into self-recognition. When Elon Musk stammers through sentences and still moves markets, it's not because he's charismatic in the traditional sense, it's because people can feel he's obsessed with something bigger than himself, and obsession that comes from purpose, not ego, has gravity. But purpose doesn't just show up. You don't wake up with it one day and suddenly exude presence. It must be clarified, fought for. You have to strip away all the borrowed dreams, the manufactured goals, the false desires implanted by culture, marketing, and social comparison. You have to ask yourself questions most people are afraid to ask. What actually matters to me? What am I willing to suffer for? What would I still build if nobody clapped? What would I say anyway, even if everyone left the room the moment I started? And once you find that answer, and you begin living that answer, everything about your presence starts to change. Your voice stabilizes. Your eye contact deepens. Your body language softens in the right places and sharpens in others. You stop trying to sound smart, and you start sounding true. You stop trying to be liked, and you start being real. Because when you carry purpose, you don't need validation, you become the one who gives it. And that reversal, that shift from needing the room to follow you to simply leading regardless, is the point where charisma becomes inevitable. That's what people respond to. That's what makes someone unforgettable. Not their outfit. Not their clever words. Not their charm. It's the feeling that this person is alive for something that matters, and being in their presence reminds you that maybe you are too. So if you want your presence to matter, if you want your voice to be remembered, if you want your energy to move rooms before your words arrive, you don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be anchored. Anchored in something that makes your silence heavier than someone else's speech. Anchored in something that gives your subtlety more impact than someone else's noise. Anchored in purpose so real that it reorders the energy of any space you walk into, not because you say it does, but because people feel it the moment you step in. Chapter 7. Discipline, the invisible weight that makes charisma real. You can have the best mindset, the strongest belief, the clearest vision, and a fire-lit purpose burning through your voice. But without discipline, without the quiet, uncelebrated muscle of self-regulation, repetition, refinement, and restraint, all of it will eventually collapse under the weight of inconsistency, because charisma, true charisma, the kind that commands attention in the most crowded rooms and holds presence even in complete silence, is not built on moments of inspiration, it is forged in the discipline of preparation, of intentional living, of showing up again and again to become the kind of person whose presence doesn't flicker with emotion or depend on external momentum, but stands firm because it's been trained to stand firm. Discipline is not about being perfect, it's about being reliable, about being stable under pressure, about being the person whose emotional tone does not collapse the moment they're challenged, about being the one who can feel resistance rising in a room and remain calm enough to hold space for it, without needing to control it or escape it, because they've already trained themselves, privately, repeatedly, with intention, to stay present when most people would retreat into performance, defensiveness, or doubt. That's what separates charisma from charm. Charm needs a script. Charisma just needs stillness. Stillness built through deliberate practice. Discipline is not exciting. It's not glamorous. It's not the part that gets applause. But it's the foundation that allows everything else to land. Without discipline, you'll chase presence in short bursts and wonder why it doesn't last. You'll feel magnetic in one conversation and invisible in the next. You'll be confident on stage but collapse in a one-on-one. Because presence without discipline is a house with no foundation. It looks fine until life shakes the ground, and then you realize all you built was performance, not power. And let's be clear, this is not about rigid control. It's not about rehearsing your gestures until they feel robotic. It's not about memorizing psychological frameworks so you can manipulate. It's about developing the internal structure that allows your natural presence to emerge, because your nervous system is stable enough, your emotional self-awareness is strong enough, and your intent is focused enough to allow authenticity to breathe through discipline, instead of being drowned by chaotic thought or reactivity. Discipline is what allows you to be fully present with another human being, because your attention is not scattered, your internal dialogue is not hijacking the moment, and you're not distracted by the noise of self-doubt or the pressure to perform. When you're disciplined, your posture holds itself naturally. Your breath supports your words. Your body language mirrors not your anxiety, but your clarity. And that's the kind of presence people feel in their gut, even if they can't describe it. This is why the most charismatic leaders, the ones whose words echo years after they're gone, didn't just rely on charisma as an accident of temperament or talent. They treated it like a craft. They disciplined their tone, not to sound scripted, but to build control under pressure. They refined their thinking, not to be rigid, but to cut through noise. They managed their energy, not to appear calm, but to transmit calm. You look at someone like Barack Obama, not just a speaker, but a carrier of composure, and you can see it wasn't performance, it was practice. The poise didn't come from personality, it came from discipline. And you'll see the opposite too. The ones who seem magnetic for 5 minutes, who command the room with volume, who perform confidence but then falter under scrutiny, who can't sustain eye contact when challenged, who ramble when silence would be more powerful. That's what charisma looks like without discipline. It's temporary. It's surface. It's heat without firewood. They didn't build the structure to hold it. Discipline also allows you to hold back when most people push. It gives you the restraint to listen fully, to wait for the moment to arrive instead of rushing to fill the silence. It gives you the poise to say less, to let your body language say what your words don't need to. And in high-stakes environments, that restraint is power, because people are watching to see who stays steady when the current gets rough. That's who they follow. Not the loudest. The most grounded. And grounding is not a personality trait. It is a disciplined state. You want to be remembered? You want to carry presence that commands respect even when you're not trying? Then show up to the work that no one else sees. Refine your tone. Master your breath. Study your own habits in conversation, your nervous gestures, your filler words, your energy leaks. Don't obsess over them, refine them. Slowly. With discipline. Until you no longer have to think about presence, because it's become how you move through the world. This is where charisma becomes real. When it's no longer a burst of charm, it's a way of being. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't require the right conditions. It shows up because you do. And it lasts, not because you forced it, but because you trained it into your nervous system. That's the work no one wants to do, but that's the work that builds the ones everyone wants to follow. Chapter 8. Action, where perception becomes impact. There comes a moment, quiet, precise, sometimes invisible to everyone else, where everything you know, everything you believe, everything you've trained, all of your mindset, your confidence, your clarity, your discipline, your purpose, all of it must move, must be translated from inner power to outer presence, from psychological readiness to behavioral execution, because charisma that stays trapped in the mind, no matter how strong, is still potential energy, and until you take action. Intentional, grounded, real-world action, your presence is theory, your voice is untested, and your impact is a story you're still telling yourself instead of a truth others feel. This is the inflection point where the inner work either becomes something people remember, or something you continue to rehearse forever in the safety of your imagination, because you can read every book on communication, you can rehearse your body language, visualize your success, meditate on your purpose, but none of it matters if you don't have the courage to step into the moment, to speak when it counts, to hold the silence when it's uncomfortable, to lean forward when instinct tells you to. Retreat, to take the seat at the table you used to wait for permission to approach, because action is what makes your charisma real, not just felt inside, but witnessed, received, remembered. And what most people misunderstand is that the kind of action that generates charisma isn't loud, isn't performative, isn't attention-hungry, it is deliberate, often subtle, but unmistakable, because it carries the weight of all your preparation, all your clarity, all your conviction, and it lands with impact not because of volume, but because of alignment, because when someone acts with absolute congruence, when their voice, body, and energy all say the same thing at the same time, it creates a kind of psychological coherence that bypasses skepticism and speaks directly to trust. People don't trust words, they trust consistency, and consistency is only proven through action. You want to be respected? Be the one who doesn't flinch when tension rises. You want to be remembered? Be the one who moves first when the opportunity is raw and unclear. You want to be followed? Be the one who speaks not because it's safe, but because it's necessary. Charisma isn't born in the planning. It's born in the moment where planning ends and movement begins. This is the level most never reach. Not because they're incapable, but because they wait for certainty before they act, not realizing that certainty is created by action, not the other way around. They rehearse endlessly but never enter the arena. They fear missteps so deeply they never feel the rhythm of mastery. But you don't learn to carry presence by waiting for the perfect moment. You learn it by moving into imperfect moments with perfect intention, and refining in real time, letting the feedback shape you, letting the silence guide you, letting the tension teach you. Every great communicator, every unforgettable presence you admire, didn't get there by having all the answers. They got there by having the courage to act when others paused. When Carnegie walked into negotiation rooms filled with industrial giants, he didn't wait to be validated, he led, because he understood that leadership is not about having control, it's about creating momentum. When Disney pitched dreams people called impossible, he didn't hesitate to take the meeting, because he knew that even if his vision wasn't accepted, his presence would leave a residue, and eventually, someone would see what he saw. When Elon Musk speaks with halting words and still moves billions, it's not because of eloquence. It's because people feel that he acts on what he believes, not what's popular, and that alone creates gravity. The world is not moved by those who wait. It is moved by those who act, not from ego, but from alignment, and action, when rooted in conviction, becomes a force far greater than charisma. It becomes influence, not forced, not pushed, not manufactured, but earned, through presence applied in motion. And let's make this real. How many moments have you watched pass you by because you hesitated just long enough to miss them? How many conversations did you stay silent in, not because you had nothing to say, but because your internal monologue told you to wait for a better time? How many rooms have you walked through unnoticed because your energy was too cautious, too uncertain, too edited by fear of being seen before you were ready? That is the cost of inaction. And that is why you must retrain yourself, not just to think clearly or feel confident, but to move in alignment with your presence, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's unfamiliar. Because that is the difference between someone who is charismatic in theory and someone who rearranges a room by walking into it. The former waits for safety. The latter steps forward on principle. The former waits for a role to be offered. The latter becomes the frame others fit into. And the secret? It's not mystical. It's not rare. It's trained action. It's the willingness to say the hard thing. To hold the line when others break. To let your silence mean something instead of apologizing for it. To move, not to be seen, but because you've seen something worth building, worth risking, worth embodying. That's where charisma stops being an impression and starts being an invitation. Not to admire you, but to follow you, to trust you, to believe that the presence they just witnessed was not an accident, but a reflection of someone who has done the work and who is willing to live it in front of them, moment by moment, word by word, decision by decision. And when that becomes who you are, not once, not occasionally, but always, you'll never have to try to be charismatic again. You'll just be the kind of person people feel before you even speak. Chapter 9. Gratitude, the hidden authority that makes power human. There is a paradox at the heart of real charisma, a truth that separates the dangerously magnetic from the manipulatively theatrical, a dividing line between presence that elevates the room and presence that only consumes it, and that truth is this: charisma without humility is just ego in a better suit, and the force that keeps power from becoming arrogance, that keeps influence from becoming manipulation, that keeps your presence from being hollowed out by performance, is gratitude, not as a surface-level gesture or polite formality, but as a lived, felt, consistent orientation to the world that reminds you that no matter how far you rise, no matter how respected you become, no matter how refined your presence is, you are not above the moment, you are within it, and that awareness changes everything. Because gratitude is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not spiritual fluff for people who don't want to compete. Gratitude is a high-performance state, an anchoring system, a psychological immune response to ego inflation and identity distortion. It is the ability to hold power and still remember what it cost to earn it. It is the strength to receive attention and still recognize the people who shaped you. It is the rare emotional maturity to walk into rooms where your voice carries weight and still listen like a student, because you know presence is not ownership, it's stewardship. When someone walks in with presence and carries gratitude at the same time, the energy in the room shifts in a way that doesn't just command attention, it disarms it. People feel their walls come down. They feel less judged, less evaluated, more seen. Because the person in front of them is not standing there to impress, they are honoring the space, honoring the connection, honoring the weight of the moment, even if they're leading it. And that's the kind of presence that's not just magnetic, it's safe, it's trustworthy. And in a world starving for authenticity, safety is more valuable than volume. Gratitude makes power human. It softens your face without weakening your message. It refines your tone without dulling your edge. It gives your silence a warmth that performance never can. Because you're not trying to dominate, you're participating. You're not there to prove, you're there to serve the moment. And people feel that. They feel it in your pacing, in your energy, in your willingness to acknowledge someone else's presence without needing it to validate your own. This is why the most unforgettable people are never just the most confident, they're the most grounded. They're the ones who radiate composure without arrogance. They're the ones whose success hasn't erased their humanity. And you sense it. You see it in their posture, yes, but also in their presence when others are speaking. In the way they look at people, not through them. In the way they give attention without calculating what they'll get back. Because their charisma doesn't feed on control. It feeds on connection. And gratitude is what keeps connection alive. And let's be clear, gratitude doesn't mean weakness or self-erasure. It means you've done enough inner work to not need to inflate yourself to feel real. You're not playing small, you've just chosen to remember the size of others too. You're not over-apologizing, you're simply aware that presence is not about being better, it's about being aligned. And when you walk through the world with that emotional intelligence, your charisma becomes something people don't just admire, they relax into it. Because you don't make them feel like they have to earn your presence. You make them feel like they've been welcomed into it. Gratitude is also what makes you last. Because the world will test you. Success will tempt you to forget the struggle. Applause will whisper that you're superior. Influence will make you believe you're the reason for everything around you. But gratitude interrupts that narrative. It reminds you of the mentors, the failures, the accidents, the miracles, the second chances, the unseen hands that shaped your path. It returns your ego to earth and fills your presence with a kind of humility that feels like gravity, not weakness, but depth. And when presence has depth, people trust it. Even when they don't understand it. Even when they don't agree with it. Because depth resonates. So, yes, build your mindset, train your presence, sharpen your vision, master your action. But if you want to be followed, not just watched, if you want to be respected beyond performance, if you want to be remembered not for how loud you were, but for how people felt after you left the room, then integrate gratitude not as a checkbox, but as a core frequency, a constant background signal in how you look at the world, how you speak to people, how you hold your power, how you tell your story, and how you choose to carry yourself when no one is watching. Because in the end, the most powerful charisma doesn't just come from the energy you project, it comes from the depth you carry. And gratitude is the quiet weight that makes your energy real. Chapter 10. Adaptability, the fluid power beneath commanding presence. There is a kind of power that doesn't announce itself, doesn't dominate through volume or stature, doesn't cling to rehearsed strategies or fixed personas, because it knows something most people don't. It knows that true charisma is not about control, it's about the ability to shift without shrinking, to evolve without losing center, to remain composed while everything around you changes, and this power, this quiet, unshakable agility of mind, emotion, and presence, is called adaptability, and it is the hidden infrastructure beneath the most respected, followed, and magnetic people on Earth. Adaptability is not weakness. It's not compromise. It's not passive agreement. It's not the absence of standards. In fact, it is the exact opposite. It is the dynamic strength to stay internally anchored while externally agile, the ability to read energy, recognize what the moment demands, and shift your approach without losing your authenticity, because when people sense that you can pivot without posturing, respond without reacting, adjust without performing, they stop seeing you as just another communicator, and they begin to feel your presence as leadership. Because in a world that's chaotic, unstable, and overloaded with noise, the people who rise are not the ones who shout louder, they are the ones who can remain emotionally precise and energetically present, even as the landscape around them changes without warning. And that precision is not memorized. It's not rehearsed. It's developed through adaptability, through the repeated choice to remain fluid when others become rigid, to stay curious when others default to judgment, to move with the moment while still moving it forward. Charisma that cannot adapt becomes fragile. It becomes formulaic. It turns into a script, a pattern, a projection, and people feel that. They feel when you're using techniques instead of truth. They feel when your confidence is attached to control. And the moment the situation shifts, when the audience responds differently than expected, when the person in front of you reacts with unexpected tension, when the emotional temperature of the room changes, your presence begins to collapse, not because you don't have the knowledge, but because you never trained your flexibility. Look at those who influence with quiet power. They are not the ones clinging to how things should go. They are the ones dancing with what's actually happening. Barack Obama didn't become magnetic by sticking to scripts. He became unforgettable because he responded to energy in real time. Oprah Winfrey didn't build her legacy by controlling every conversation. She did it by adapting her presence to each person she sat with, creating emotional safety without sacrificing her own clarity. Bruce Lee said it best, "Be like water." Because water adapts. And that's why it carves through stone. The mistake people make is thinking adaptability means you're soft, that you bend too easily, that you can be molded by the opinions of others. But the truth is, real adaptability requires more inner strength than stubbornness ever will, because it means you are no longer attached to how you're seen, you're no longer defensive when things don't go according to plan, you're no longer clinging to the role you thought you had to play, and that freedom makes you dangerous, in the best way, because now you can move anywhere, hold your presence in any space, lead any conversation, command any room, not by force, but by flow. Adaptability is also the mark of emotional intelligence. When someone speaks, and you truly listen not just to their words, but to their tone, their posture, their hesitation, their energy shifts, and then you respond from that awareness, you create connection that no amount of polished rhetoric can replicate. That's the kind of charisma people don't forget, because it feels intimate, specific, alive. It feels like you see them. And that's what makes people follow you, not because you impressed them, but because you met them. But you don't develop this on accident. You develop it by putting yourself in uncontrolled environments. You build it by engaging with people you don't understand, by holding presence in rooms that don't mirror your values, by practicing stillness in disagreement, and by remaining curious in the face of rejection. Because the more emotionally complex the situation, the more opportunities you have to prove your adaptability not just to others, but to yourself. And that's the real gift of it. When you know you can adapt, your confidence becomes calm. You don't need to over-prepare every word. You don't need to memorize your every gesture. You don't need to guess what people want to hear. You walk in with the knowledge that no matter what unfolds, you will meet the moment. You will read it. You will adjust. You will shape it, not because you forced it, but because you had the flexibility to let it move through you, and the presence to redirect it where it needs to go. And when people feel that, when they sense that your presence is not conditional, not rehearsed, not fragile, they give you their trust. Not because you demanded it, but because they saw you adapt without shrinking, shift without selling out, and stand your ground without becoming rigid. That's what the world needs more of. Not perfection. Not dominance. Not polished scripts. But adaptable humans with anchored values and fluid expression. People who can walk into the fire and still breathe. People who don't break when the script changes. People who move with life, and because of that, move others without trying. Chapter 11. Resilience, the authority you earn by refusing to disappear. There is a kind of authority that no credential can grant you, no course can teach you, no room can hand you. It is an authority that must be earned in the silence of disappointment, in the private chaos of failure, in the slow grind of being overlooked, underestimated, misunderstood, and still choosing, deliberately, repeatedly, without applause, to show up again, not louder, not angrier, not bitter, but deeper, wiser, more grounded, because that is what resilience really is, not just the ability to survive adversity, but the decision to build presence inside of it, to construct charisma not from praise or perfect moments, but from the wreckage of everything that tried to reduce you. Resilience is not something you announce. It's not a caption or a speech or a personal brand. It is an energy signature, an emotional frequency in your voice, in your eyes, in your pauses, in the way you hold yourself when things are uncertain, when people are watching and expecting you to fold, and instead, you just stand there, not shaken, not defensive, just here, clear, calm, whole. And that unshakable presence is charisma in its final form, because it no longer depends on momentum, approval, timing, or even external conditions. It is internal infrastructure, built brick by brick through the experiences most people run from. You can always feel it in someone who's been through the fire and came out intact, not because they were invincible, but because they chose not to disappear. You can hear it in their tone. There's no strain, no need to impress, no apology for being seen. You can feel it in their stillness. It's not passive, it's earned quiet, the kind that doesn't beg for attention because it already knows its value. And when you combine that kind of emotional weight with clarity, discipline, and presence, you become the kind of person who doesn't just speak to the room, you stabilize it. Because real charisma isn't just about energy, it's about durability. Anyone can light up a moment, but very few can carry the moment when it turns against them. When the speech goes wrong. When the deal collapses. When the crowd shifts. When the silence gets heavier than expected. And this is where most people lose their presence, not because they lack skill, but because they've only trained their charisma for ideal conditions. But the ones who last, the ones who make their presence undeniable, are the ones who've trained for disruption. Resilience is what makes your presence reliable. It tells people, consciously or not, I don't disappear when things get hard. I don't crumble when I'm challenged. I don't need certainty to show up fully. I've been here before. I've built my voice in the dark. I've rebuilt my confidence after loss. I've stood in front of people who didn't believe in me, and I stayed anyway. And that energy doesn't require you to be loud. It doesn't require you to prove anything. It just is. And people follow it instinctively, because it's rare, and because it makes them feel safe. You can be smart. You can be talented. You can have the best preparation in the world. But without resilience, your charisma is conditional. It lives in the light but dies in the dark. It flows in the easy moments but fractures under pressure. And the real world doesn't care how confident you are when everything goes according to plan. It cares who you become when nothing does. That's where leadership is born. That's where influence is measured. That's where presence becomes legend. Think of anyone whose presence stayed with you long after they left the room. Chances are, it wasn't their polish, it was their composure. It wasn't that they knew every answer, it was that they didn't flinch when they didn't. It wasn't that they were perfect, it was that they were present anyway. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens through friction. Through repetition. Through the deliberate choice to become solid when most people become noise. So if you want presence that matters, charisma that moves people, voice that stays even in silence, stop chasing performance, and start building resilience. Take the risks that might bruise your ego but will build your core. Stand in the rooms where you're not understood, and learn to stay anyway. Speak the truth even when it shakes, and realize that every time you don't collapse, you become heavier in the best way. Your presence begins to carry memory, and memory is what separates the forgettable from the followed. Resilience won't make you flashy, but it will make you formidable. You won't always be the most charming, but you'll be the one people trust when things get real. You won't always get the spotlight, but you'll be the one people remember when the lights go out. Because presence built on resilience doesn't fade. It gets stronger with time. Chapter 12. Embodiment. Becoming the message the world can't unhear. There is a point where knowledge ends, where all the mindset work, all the journaling, all the affirmations, all the theory, all the frameworks, all the performance coaching, all the high-performance podcasts and social feedback loops fall silent, and what's left is not what you've memorized, not what you've studied, not what you've told yourself to believe, but what you are, what you exude without effort, what speaks on your behalf before you even open your mouth, and this is the final form of charisma, not something you use, not something you access, but something you embody, something you've become, so completely, so ruthlessly, so undeniably that it bleeds from your silence, radiates from your stillness, pulses through your presence like voltage, and the people around you don't just hear your words, they feel your message through every molecule of who you've trained yourself to be. This is where performance ends and real presence begins, not as a tool to influence others, but as the natural expression of someone who has integrated every layer of what they say they believe, someone who doesn't toggle between confidence and fear depending on the audience, Someone who doesn't need to recalibrate when they walk into a new environment, because their inner calibration is already locked, already tested, already solid, and that's what makes them powerful. They are not adjusting to the world. The world adjusts to them. Because embodiment doesn't come from performance. It comes from alignment lived consistently. It comes from the small, invisible decisions no one sees. The moments you didn't react when someone disrespected you, because your power didn't need revenge. The moments you chose the hard silence over the easy lie, because your voice had become too expensive to waste. The moments you walked away from spaces that couldn't hold your expansion, because you no longer needed to shrink to feel safe. The moments you said yes when you were scared, and said no when you were desperate and still owned. Both decisions because they came from truth, not fear. When you embody your message, people stop analyzing you, they just respond. They don't know why your tone moved them or why your pause felt heavier than someone else's speech. They just know that you're different. They know that you mean what you say because your presence is congruent. Your nervous system is congruent. Your micro-expressions, your pacing, your posture, your eye contact, it's all aligned. It's all saying the same thing. This is who I am, and nothing in this room can destabilize that. This is what creates gravitational influence. Not charm. Not tactics. Not learned habits you use in job interviews or client meetings. But embodied identity, presence that has been earned through friction, through pattern disruption, through internal refinement so intense that nothing you carry is accidental anymore. There's no guesswork, no pretense, no grasping. Just you, clear, grounded, complete. And that's what people follow. Not information, not charisma hacks, but wholeness. Because wholeness is rare. And what is rare becomes unforgettable. The men and women who moved history weren't just charismatic. They were embodied. Mandela didn't just talk about dignity, he radiated it from behind bars. Eleanor Roosevelt didn't recite courage. She stood as courage when it was unfashionable. Da Vinci didn't teach creativity, he became its embodiment. Their presence wasn't tied to results. It was born from process, repetition, integrity, tension, and it lasted because it was truth in human form. And truth, once embodied, is the most powerful frequency a human being can emit. You don't get there by copying mannerisms or memorizing scripts. You get there by deciding to become the message before anyone believes it. You get there by walking like someone who's already earned the right to speak. By breathing like someone whose silence is full. By listening like someone who doesn't need to be heard to know their worth. You get there by refining the parts of you that no one claps for. And you stay there by treating presence like a lifestyle, not a trick. And here's the hardest part to swallow. The most magnetic people you've ever met don't think of themselves as charismatic. Because it's no longer something they think about. It's no longer a question in their mind. It's not a thing they turn on. It's simply who they've become. Their very identity carries the signal. They've stopped trying to look confident and started being conviction. They've stopped trying to manage impressions and started living by design. They don't care about being liked. They care about being aligned. And that difference? That's everything. Because the final evolution of charisma is this. You no longer chase it. You don't angle for attention. You don't posture for status. You don't seek resonance. You embody it. And the world doesn't just notice. It adjusts. People treat you differently. They talk to you differently. They remember you longer. Not because of what you said, but because of what you made them feel just by being fully you. So if you take anything away from this blueprint, let it be this. Stop trying to become more impressive. Start becoming more real. Sharpen your clarity. Deepen your belief. Define your purpose. Align your action. Train your discipline. Refine your presence. Anchor your resilience. Release your ego. Adapt like water. Walk with gratitude. And then, embody the message. Don't talk about it. Live it. Don't wait to be ready. Move now. Don't aim to be charismatic. Become unforgettable. Because you are now the kind of person whose very existence speaks louder than their words ever could. And in that moment, when your truth lives in your breath, your energy, your presence, your posture, and your silence, you will realize you no longer need charisma. Because you've become the signal itself. And the world will never forget how it felt to be near you.